So I've also been asked, how can humans reduce their carbon footprint? Well, this is another one of those questions where I'd say, I think we're asking the wrong question. The latest AR6 report showed that if we hit net zero, if the countries that have committed to net zero by 2050 and 2100 do hit net zero, we've still missed our climate targets. We've hit a 1.06 degree increase since 2000, the early 2000s, and we're on a trajectory for 2.8 degrees. So we see a lot of folks adjusting their targets to try and say, well, we've missed 1.5, which was what the original IPCC report said should be our target. We have to adjust for 2, but we're unlikely going to hit 2, even if there's all the net zero commitments are achieved, because there's too much carbon load in the atmosphere. Now, just so you understand the severity of that impact, is at 2 degrees, we lose 80% of our oceanic ecosystem, which is 40% of the world's oxygen. And that will have a devastating effect on other types of ecosystems. So for me, the net zero thing is about like, it's not regenerative, it's focusing on how do we do less bad. If we're to flip the conversation into a regenerative conversation, we will be saying, how can I create more value for the ecosystem than I extract? And this is a really big and powerful question for us as humans, because since we moved into kind of like agrarian development of our communities and societies, and since, you know, the hierarchical developments of power structures in the churches and things like this, we have been coming from a perspective of scarcity, that there's not enough resources to support everyone on the planet. And we hear this even in the sustainability dialogue, where we have to focus on food security because there's not enough food. Well, yes, there are over 1 billion people starving on the planet, but it doesn't mean there's not enough food, right? Because on the other part of the planet, there's a whole heap of waste, right? So as humans, in my own relationship to myself and into the rest of my world, I need to be willing to challenge this scarcity model, that I'm so afraid of loss that I have to get whatever I can for myself at the expense of others. Because in nature, if we're following a nature-based system or a regenerative system, nature exists in reciprocity. We exist in relationship to each other that serves a mutual benefit. And we don't see that in the way in which we interact in society. We see trade-offs, we see compromise, we see, even in our economic models, it's competition for scarce resources. And how can we extract those resources for as low cost as we can, scale it as fast as we can to make enough profit to then extract out and deliver to our shareholders. And this is the fundamental framework of being that needs to shift. So we can look at all the doing less bad solutions in the world, less plastic, less this, less that. But if that is our focus, we miss the very important paradigmatic shift that needs to happen in our thinking and in our being. We are enough. We have enough. And I know that I'm saying this from a white privileged position, right? People who are in developing nations, people of color, people who are stuck in poverty. The reality is they don't have enough. But from a global perspective, there is enough for everybody. So when we moved as a family, we moved to a farm, and the land here had been very over-farmed. The old guy up the road still uses pesticides to spray his cabbages. There's a story in the community that the land is very fertile because that's how it's been over history. Even though it's not actually, the quality of the soil is very depleted. You can still grow typical things like potatoes or whatever. But there's definitely a lot of monoculture and not a lot of diversity. So the thing that my husband and I did first, particularly my husband, was we focused on soil, on regenerating soil conditions, because the soil when we moved here was like a rock, right? So rather than focusing on let's use the land for as much produce as we can first, we thought, okay, we'll get a little bit of produce over the first year, but let's focus first on really working with the soil, working with the system. How can we put in more than we take? And we did. We planted about 140 different species. We started hot composting. We started really learning about all the permaculture design techniques. And the soil now is unrecognizable from when we first moved here, and that's only been in 1 year. So when we're looking at our approach to things, we should be asking the question, how can I contribute more value than I extract? What is my relationship and my role to the system that I'm working within at the moment? And it doesn't have to be a farm. It could be a neighborhood. It could be a small plot of land. It could be my workspace. It could be my own home. We're each nested in a system. A single person is nested in the context of a family or a group of friends, which is nested within a community, which is nested within a neighborhood, which is nested within a city, and so on and so forth. So how we bring a deepening understanding to our role in that nested system is deeply important, because then we will be able to identify the areas in which we can actually contribute greater value than what we're extracting. And if each person is able to do that, rather than trying to close themselves down and do less bad, it's a contracting kind of energy, it's a pulling away energy, it's a non-participatory energy, and instead open up to understanding our role in the living system within which we're participating, then we have an opportunity to actually create greater value. And so that's why I'm working in terms of my investment strategies and also within my organizations, not interested in net zero, interested in net positive. How do we get to net positive? How do we understand those systems powerfully enough to get to net positive? And if we can each participate individually at that level, collectively, we have an incredible shot of actually mitigating a lot of the impending crises that are coming our way.